All right. Something that does open up this week and does kind of get going this week is the transfer portal. Richie, we're going to go position by position and talk about how likely it is or what you think Florida State's needs might be position by position here in the portal when it opens up. I think on the 16th. I think the 16th is when it opens up, which would be Wednesday, if my math is any good. Every year, the spring portal, Richie, I feel like they hype the heck out of it. And it's just like, oh, all these guys are going to jump in. It's going to be so crazy in the spring. And then I feel like the spring, but they're not tricking me this year. Now, maybe this year it will be crazy but they're not tricking me. Every year they talk about how crazy it's going to be, whether it's a guy that's national or it's people at ESPN or just whomever. The portal is just going to be insane. It's never really that crazy. I don't know if it's going to be crazy or not, but do you have quick thoughts on that? And then we'll go position by position on what Florida State may do, may not do.
Yeah, and I don't really follow a bunch of other teams like you do when it comes to the portal. But it's hard to think of how many great players people have gotten out of the portal in the spring. Because typically, if a player hops in the portal in the spring, it's most likely because they found out that they did not win a starting job or they don't feel good about winning a starting job heading into next season. Obviously, we got Keon Coleman. I think he was, in May or something when he hopped on.
Later.
That was a very rare. You don't get, essentially a first-round draft pick. He was the first pick of the second round out of the spring portal typically. But it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, obviously there was a huge portal entry that we're going to talk about towards the end of the show. But I'm not going to put all my eggs in this basket with Easter coming up. No pun intended there, right? But I'm not expecting a ton of, first and second round talent to hop in the portal this spring.
Yeah, it just never is as exciting. Now, I'll say that, and like Jeremiah Smith or somebody crazy will jump in just because I've said that. But yeah, I agree. We got Keon, that was kind of crazy. Obviously a massive pickup that, anybody would have taken him. But I just think it's so hard, you're taking guys that and this idea of like tampering and everything else that happens and canceling spring games because people are scared to tamper. I saw, Florida didn't televise their spring game because they were afraid of tampering. And then after the game, Napier said that like 98% of his roster is already signed. So I'm like, well, then why were you worried about tampering? If that was the case, like just air the dang spring game so we can watch football.
What does being signed even mean?
I guess signed with an NIL collective. Not that they can't get out of that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. They can walk away from that.
But, again, I don't really worry about. But yeah, again, you're right. Like the guys that are jumping the portal, a lot of times because they've gotten passed up. It's because other guys have jumped ahead of them. It's there are usually situations that lead to it. Not to say that starters can't jump in the portal. Not to say that tampering is not a real thing. You're usually just not getting an insane crop of talent in the spring. Maybe that will be different this year. All right, position by position, we're going to talk about a departure here in just a minute, so we won't go super deep into this. But would you have any expectation of Florida State going after a quarterback in the spring portal? All right, I'll get right back to the video, but first I want to give some love to our friends over at Russo & Co. I told you about Chris Russo and his business last week, and it is certainly tax season. Hopefully you've already gotten your 1099s or your W-2s. Listen, Chris is a huge Florida State fan, just like you and I are. He's been a CPA since 2002. He got his MBA in 2004. He's also got a law degree. He's got 25 plus years of experience doing this stuff. And if you need assistance with any tax preparation, any tax advisory, if you need help with preparing 1099s or W-2s for employees, if you own a business, give my guy Chris a call. His info is down in the description. You can also see it here on the screen. Again, Chris will do his very best to get you taken care of, to make sure that you're getting your maximum refund, that you keep as little in the IRS's hands as possible, but of course, doing everything legally and not getting you in trouble. Chris will hold your hand every step of the way. If you mention that you saw his information here on Double Fries No Slaw, he'll give you a free consultation. Again, it's Russo & Co. Great guy, great Seminole, and hopefully if you are in need of any tax services, you will certainly reach out to him. We'll tell you more about him as the weeks and months go on as we lead up to tax season, but again, appreciate Chris at Russo & Co. for their support.
If the right one was available, I think you do need another quarterback on this roster, but it wouldn't. I would not expect a starting caliber quarterback to be brought in this cycle.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. It would surprise me if Florida State went after a quarterback, if Florida State picked up a quarterback. If they do, I think it's just for depth purposes. If I mean, we're going to talk about Nico in a little bit, but like, say Nico really wanted to be in Tallahassee. First of all, I think it would be foolish of Florida State to pay the price tag of a Nico Iamaleava. But even if that, like, without having a spring, does he fit what guy? Like, I don't know. I don't know that would be. So, like, I guess it would, again, it would depend on who is entering, how much sense does it make. I don't have a lot of hope as Florida State just took a double. What in the world are we doing here? I thought that was out. I don't know that a quarterback would make a lot of sense. It would surprise me if Florida State took a quarterback in the portal. If they do, maybe for depth purposes, otherwise, I'd be pretty surprised. Running back is a really stacked room. Let's talk about them. I'll do running back. We can flip flop on this. You can go and then I'll go. Running back is a really deep room. I think they like Roydell. I think they are excited about Chroma coming in. I don't think they would take a running back unless it was kind of a workhorse that you thought was going to potentially, kind of vie to be your number one. I don't know that they need another RB3 on this roster. I think they have about 7 of them, right? And so running back, I would be pretty hesitant to think that they would take. I don't know if you have different thoughts there.
No, I agree. Like I said, and we just talked about it. You're not going to get some all-world or all-American running backs. They're not going to hop into the portal after the spring. It just won't happen, and there's no need to. Like you said, it's a loaded room. I think those scholarships are better used elsewhere.
Yeah, and NIL dollars, right? Like you have a limited budget to work with. And if you get somebody really cheap and it's more of a growth development thing, again, I don't think you're pulling in a running back. A wide receiver, though, this was an interesting one. What are your thoughts on wide receiver?
Yeah, I think you probably should take some in because you have a lot of potential on the roster. Whether it's Deuce Robinson, who was a December transfer, and then Hakeem, does he take that next step? You think about McCoy, you think about Boggs. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But I think even if it's just a wide receiver 2 at another school or wide receiver 1 at a small school, I'm fine with taking one.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think you take. Again, wide receivers a room that's got a ton of guys in it too. I think you might see some attrition at the wide receiver position. But if you can go get, if you can go get a true number 2, right? And I know that they, do squirrel kind of probably your 1-2 right now, but there is no rule against having 2 like number 2 quarterback or number 2 wide receivers. And there's no rule against upgrading that room. I don't think you grab somebody if they're like a 3 or 4, because I think you have enough of that in there. But if you can find, obviously you can find some kind of a Keon or a real 1, you certainly do that. But if you can find somebody that really fits in well and fits what you want to do, I'm not opposed to a wide receiver. I think that's something you could look for. Tight end, I'll take it. I don't think you go after a tight end. I mean, unless there was a tight end out there that, again, was just kind of the Max Clare guy that went from Purdue to Ohio State, who's maybe one of the best tight ends in the country, or something of that talent level. Maybe you look at it if they have a Tallahassee tie or a Malzahn tie or something like that. I don't suspect that one of those jumps in the portal. Again, we talked about how spring is limited. I don't think you go after a tight end. I'd be pretty surprised if they do.
Yeah, I don't think so. You don't need to load up the tight end room. I mean, you got Landon Thomas, you got Biscuit. I think that's more than enough. Landon Thomas, he's going to finally be healthy, hopefully heading into fall camp. He should be mostly healthy now, but definitely by fall camp, if you can keep him healthy, I think he could be a true tight end 1 that, a top 10 tight end in the country potential. And then, Biscuit, they're 2 completely different body sizes. I think you're perfectly fine there. There's no need to waste scholarships on tight ends.
Yeah, they also really like Chase Lofton. Does Amari play? I think he's going to be mainly DN, but you could always utilize him if really needed. I don't think they need to do anything with tight end. Oh, and they brought in Pittman from UCF, who they really like him too. I think that room's pretty loaded. In fact, this is maybe a good thing, maybe not a good thing. I think it might be the best room on Florida State's roster. And that's probably not good for a running offense, for your best room to be your tight ends. But I think that's one of the rooms that's more talented that Florida State has right now. Certainly on offense, it'd be the top room. Now, again, it's probably it's the least important room on offense. So is that a good thing, bad thing? I don't know. But it would mean to me that they don't need to take a tight end. Offensive line, I'll just split this up two ways: interior and exterior. So like, your guards and centers and then tackles. I don't know if you have thoughts here on the offensive line.
I think they like what they have, right now. You're not going to a premier offensive lineman is not going to hit the portal. It just will not happen. That is the toughest position to find. If you're looking at exterior on the tackle position, you do have a lot of older guys. So I'm okay taking a guy that has multiple years left. I don't think it on either the exterior or interior. I don't think you take anybody who only has 1 year left unless you think certainly that they will be a starter for you. There's just no point. Again, scholarships come at a premium, and if you're taking an offensive lineman, it needs to be someone that has multiple years left, or someone that Gus and Mike just love and think he has a chance to be a difference maker.
Yeah, interior, I feel pretty good. I think if you can find a tackle, even if it is for depth, just some of your guys are banged up right now. A lot of times a tackle can slide inside if you need him anyway. If he's good enough to play tackle, even if he's kind of a tackle too, right? Like a second string guy, like it's hard to make it through a season with 5 guys healthy, and you obviously have less tackles on the roster that you're confident in. I would say tackle would be a position that I would go after, even if they're not. You're right. The chances of you finding an Amarius Mims and then actually being able to land him are fairly slight, right? Fairly small. But if you can find a tackle, even if it is for depth, I think that is a position that you attack. I think you need more depth there. You need bodies. That would be a position that I'd be comfortable tampering with, whether it's for this year or going forward. And so hopefully that is a position that they attack. Interior, I feel pretty good. I don't think Florida State's offensive line is going to be, top 5 in the ACC or anything like that. It's got a chance to be certainly top half of the ACC, but I do think that tackle is one that you can never have enough of, right? To get, thin out some of the wide receiver and running back room and go get me a guy that can block on the edge. And I'm in a much better mood. Now defensive side of the ball, defensive end, thoughts there?
Yeah, I think if you can find one, you take him, because you don't have anyone really proven at defensive end. I mean, you have some potential. I just, it's depressing looking at the defensive end roster that I'm looking at right now. Yeah, I think you take one if you can find one, even if you're not even that positive. If you would just have a hunch, or if you see potential in him, I think you should take a defensive end.
Yeah, I think so too. Even if it's for depth, you've got Amari. They like James Williams. I think you're gonna rotate more, playing a 3-3-5. You're gonna have more guys coming in and out. I think defensive end would be one that you go after, and I feel the same way about defensive tackle. I don't think you can have enough defensive linemen, even if they're depth or even if they're for the future, or kind of whatever your situation is there. I think that. I think that you need more bodies there. I think they like what they have at defensive tackle. I don't really expect like a ton of attrition on the defensive line. Certainly not from like your first string, second string. But if you can upgrade that room and continue to get it better, the recruiting there just frankly has not been good enough. Now I know they got picked up a couple of defensive ends this year late in the cycle that will help. But I think if you can upgrade that room, you certainly go after it. How about this? I don't know that I would have told you this before a year ago or 2 years ago or anything. Linebacker might be the room that I'm least concerned about. Maybe not for like their ceiling, but I think you have enough at linebacker right now with Herring and Cryer and a lot of the guys you have back. I think that linebacker is a room that I'm really not that concerned about, and a room that I don't think they'll go after super hard in the portal. Now, if they go after a guy for depth for a few years from now, or they find a guy that they think can, in his second year, 2 years from now, be really good, then maybe if there's an elite guy that jumps in that you kind of have a tie with, or that you were really close with in his recruitment, certainly that would, yes, I will take an elite linebacker, but I don't think linebacker would be a position that I would go after super heavy.
Yeah, and again, I think your best bet, probably especially in the spring, is finding a player, whether it be any position, but especially linebacker. Like you said, we're solid there up front, or at the starts. But Just look at what Luke Laux has done with the basketball program. He's finding, all conference players from smaller schools. If you can find a guy like that, and he does have the size to play in the ACC, then that's a guy you definitely want to go get. Especially, defensively, it's again, you only have so many scholarships, but you can never have enough bodies. And I think, they can be picky there. There's some positions where they cannot be too picky, where they just need a body, but this is not one of those positions.
Yeah, with the scholarship limits up to like 105, I think there will be enough kind of positive attrition that I think they'll be fine
Yeah.
if they need to take more. Cornerback, I'll start here. I think cornerback would be one that I would go after. I think there's a lot of young talent there, but if you can go out and find a really good corner, that would be one that I would say you want to continue to add to that room. I think it's probably a really good sign that Arnaud has kind of balled out and they've really liked what they've gotten from him. As a true freshman, that's great because it means you hit on that eval really well. Looking at the rest of that room, does it mean that other guys that are year 2 and year 3 in the system probably aren't where you thought they would be or thought they could be? Maybe. And so if that's the case, I think that it would probably make sense to add some depth to that room. And if you can go out and, with the caveat on all of these positions, if you can find an elite guy, yes, you take them. But at cornerback specifically, I think that'd be a position that I would target if I was FSU.
Yeah, I'm going to use the same answer that I used for a few positions. It's one you want to take if you can get a multiple year guy, or if you can find a guy like Cypress, who you got in from Virginia, who was quality and was just looking for a bigger stage. I think it makes things a lot tougher coming off a 2-win season. But with all the changes at the coaching staff, you can sell, hey, you're going to get a chance to play Alabama week 1, and everyone will be watching that game. And you do have some selling points, but I think it's going to be hard to convince a player if Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, and all of those schools are in on them. So you're going to have to find that sweet spot. So recruiting purposes, a player ranks around like 150, 200 because the top 100 kids aren't coming right now.
Yeah,
So,
no, I think it's really tough to imagine them pulling in some, insanely elite talent, but I do think quarterback would be a good one. Or a cornerback would be one if you could add to that room. And then safety, I actually kind of like where they're at safety too. I'm not feeling like that's a major need on the team, but again, I'll just it's kind of the same idea of the linebacker. If you can add some depth, if you can pull somebody that is really elite that jumps in the portal, sure. But safety is not one of my bigger concerns at this moment.
yeah, it's probably my least concerning room on the entire roster at this point, honestly. So again, like you said, if you can get somebody, or a young guy with a lot of potential, or even if it's a guy that with 1 year eligibility, but you think he could push for a starting job in fall camp, then you take him. But it's definitely not a position that they are going to prioritize.
All right. So what are your thoughts? Let us know down in the comments. We did this as part of our live show. And obviously, if you're watching live right now, you know that. But let us know your thoughts down in the comments, what they shouldn't go after. I saw a comment, no more 1-year rentals. Now, I agree with that. Like, if you can get a couple of years out of somebody, that's certainly the ideal. But, if you have a 1-year Keon Coleman type of player that you can pick up at any position, I don't know that you're going to complain about that. Don't know that you're going to complain about that too much. I do think, when you look at the schedule, you look at this roster, you need some difference makers. I think they've raised the talent enough to where they'll be in most games. We kind of know what the 4 tough games are, but if you can find some difference makers that can really help you in the big games, certainly not going to complain about that.